Welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, your host for this program. This is a program designed to give us all a little more insight into the personalities involved in community affairs and politics, and also some idea about the issues that are developing out there. Our guest today is a lady who's been involved in a wide variety of political issues, but also has been a nurturing mother and wife, and someone involved in the political process too. Her name is Janet Carlson, and I'd like to welcome you to the show. I gave you sort of a different introduction in a way, just because of the broad perspective that we try to get on individuals. We try to get some idea more about people involved in government and the community, because so many times we see people, but we only hear sound bites about them or about issues. And one of the things we always like to ask is, can you give us a little bit of a sketch about you as a person, where you grew up, where you went to school, that sort of thing?
Sure. I was born and raised in Grants Pass, which is in Southern Oregon, and went to high school in Astoria. Moved to Salem in the last 9 weeks of my junior year and graduated from McNary High School in '71. And then went on to Willamette University, majored in political science, graduated there in December of '74, and did my graduate work at Brigham Young University in political science also. Finished that work in '77, and then 20 years later got my PhD at University of Oregon in special education and community resources. So that's sort of the snapshot. I was a teacher for about 10 years. My first teaching job was in Brownsville and Halsey, and I don't know if even you know this about me, but I was the permanent substitute for John Powell, who lobbies for some of the insurance interests and has an office pretty close to your office. When he went to the Senate for the first time, I was his substitute, and that was my very first teaching job. Then went on to do my graduate work, came back to Oregon, taught for a good 6-7 years in the Hillsborough district, and that's where I taught junior high. I was a French teacher and a student activities director, so I was the resident dance DJ, club advisor, service organization person, and then went on to work in state government.
Well, yeah, when you went on to work in state government, by that time it seems that you'd covered so many bases. First, educationally, it's good for folks from Oregon to know, well, you're an Oregon high school graduate that is here at McNary and Salem, but you're not just a Central Valley person in the sense that you've got Southern Oregon and you're as part of your roots. But when it comes to education, you jumped in at Willamette and you majored in political science.
Yes, I did.
Now, why did you do that?
Well, I started out in music, to be honest with you, because I love music, and ended up changing because I had a particular professor that I enjoyed, and political science was sort of I loved the history and I liked the concepts that I was learning. I liked the legal parts of it, and I did well in it, so I stayed with it. Towards the beginning of my junior year, my mother asked me what I was going to do with my liberal arts education, and I told her that I didn't really need to think about what I was going to do with liberal arts, that I was going to, analyze the world and do great things. And she said, you need to think of a job. And so I decided being a teacher might be a good thing to get involved with. And at Willamette at the time, which I think was sort of on the cutting edge, they're doing this now more with school reform all over in higher education, but you didn't major in education as a secondary teacher. You majored in your content area, and then you took the educational methods classes that went along with the content area. So I had an expertise in social sciences, and then got the education classes to go along with it, did my student teaching at McNary, and then went on to teach.
Well, you join a large number of people who've been involved in the community, not only as teachers, but then as doers. And of course, teachers are doers. We tend to forget that sometimes. Just as part of the process, you have to do a lot of things working with kids. What was the experience like for you as a teacher over the years?
I loved being a teacher. I think for me, because I had been so involved with activities when I'd been in school myself, I'd been involved in student government, I'd been involved in cheerleading, I was involved in a lot of clubs and organizations, that I gravitated toward helping students with that area. I think there's a lot of research to back up the idea that academics are, of course, critical, but oftentimes what keeps a child in school is the other experiences that they have, the social experiences, and also the leadership skills that they develop in being involved in extracurricular activities. So that became a focus of mine, and because of that, I developed some very close bonds with the students that I worked with, and was able, I think, to have a positive influence in a lot of different areas. One of the things that we looked at is oftentimes student councils are involved with what they call the blue ribbon youth, if you will, the ones that are in advanced placement classes and motivated and going on to do great things. And sometimes student council doesn't really touch the lives of students who may be more at risk, less connected with school. So we made a genuine effort to try to do outreach and to try to develop activities and programs that would meet the needs of all students, not just the students that traditionally gravitate towards student council.
I'm going to interrupt you
I'm sorry.
and comment on that. I remember back in my high school days, and I went to high school in Virginia, that we did have that syndrome that you just described. We had what we called the United Student Improvement League. That was a group that was sort of the blue ribbon kids and or the preppies. And then we later developed what we called at Wakefield High School the Wakefield Independent Party, which was more of a broader based group trying to reach out to the whole constituency, this in a high school with 2,000 students. But until you brought it up, it never occurred to me that we were probably doing in practice something that you've noticed in theory, that it's important to bring everybody into involvement in the school community, not just the preppy blue ribbon kids or whatever. So let's pick up on that, because I hadn't thought about it from that context before. And how did you bring this into operation in terms of practice in your teaching work?
Well, recognizing that not every child enjoys sports, not every child is interested in going to dances, and those are sort of the things that student council and schools emphasize, we started trying to think of creative ways to get kids involved. One of the things that we had at Evergreen Junior High School was a very long lunch period. In fact, for the 9th graders, it was well over an hour. I think it was an hour and 10 minutes. And they had opportunities for kids to connect with teachers, use the library or whatever. It was on a staggered schedule, so the 7th graders, I think, got somewhere around 30, 40 minutes for lunch altogether. So as the activities director, I had to help the administrators figure out what do you do with kids for an hour and 10 minutes to keep them occupied. And so there were intramural things in the gym, and we did some Spirit Week types of things and the traditional things. But we decided that we'd have a music room in the gym. And we had a stereo, and we would play records, and the kids would come in and sit around. Well, what I noticed was that there was a group of kids, well, there's a number of different music groups that are involved in school. At the time, this was in the 80s, so there were the kids that liked the popular music, there were the kids that liked the hard rock and heavy metal, there were the wavers, you know, so there was a lot of different requests for music. So what I did was I organized a DJ club, and the DJ club was a group of kids that were spending time in my room during lunch listening to alternative music instead of coming to the music room. So this gave them leadership skills. They had to program the music, come to me with the lists, make sure that there weren't any inappropriate songs on the list that, you know, parents and teachers would object to them playing in a school setting, that type of thing.
So you basically recognized a need and in a practical way designed an outreach program without calling it that.
Right.
To give these kids hooks, links to the academic environment. And having that, they'd stay in school, they'd be involved, and also get their education as part of this package.
Right.
Now I'd like to fast forward, because this ties in with a lot of the consulting work that you're doing with children and families from those days as a teacher and bringing those kids in at the high school level to the kind of work you've done the last few years. And perhaps you could give us a thumbnail sketch of what you've been doing working with the counties. Okay,
well, what happened was when I ended my teaching career, we moved to Salem, and I taught at Sprague High School for the last year of my teaching as a permanent substitute. It's sort of a long story, so I won't get into it, but it was a teacher that I had done my student teaching with at McNary High School, and called her up, and she happened to be going on sabbatical, and I was able to step in for her for a year. But then the schools were going into the safety net. Funding was an issue. There weren't a lot of teaching jobs available. So I landed in state government in a public administrative internship position for 2 years with the Budget and Management Division. And after I got done with that, became the budget director at the State Commission on Children and Families. And this was a whole new world to me, because here was a program of government trying to work with business communities, the faith community, trying to develop a comprehensive look at how we can support families from the time prenatal, even before children are born, through the time that they reach adulthood. And the idea was that government can't do this alone, that we need folks to all work together to take responsibility, and also the idea that the decisions about how public monies are used in communities is best made by the people who live in those communities, that they care the most about their children, that they know the most about their community circumstances, that every community is unique. And so if we work together with all of these different interests coming together, we could build a system that would support families.
So at this point, you've managed to pull in, you've got your philosophical background and understanding, you have now this new public orientation in terms of working with communities. But also you'd gotten training in what I'll call the economics, the finance side of government through this internship, and you're pulling all of these things together to, in effect, to try to weave some fabric which can be used for community action. Well, let's pick up from there. And so there you are working with the State Commission on Children and Families. How has it blossomed since then?
Well, I started working on my PhD, as I told you before, and so I left the State Commission in late '95 and started my consulting work in '96. And at that time, a number of the different counties that I had been working with from the State Commission were interested in having me work with them more closely. So I've been doing contract work for Josephine County, Douglas County, Marion County.
Now, we're going to pause again.
Okay.
The folks in the audience are saying, consultant, what's a consultant? Could you explain what the consulting work is all about, working with the counties?
Well, let me give you some examples.
Right.
In Douglas County, they were asked to do a juvenile crime prevention planning process, and there were some monies that the governor had in his budget that would go down to the counties. So I helped facilitate a process for all of these different interest groups that I was talking about, the juvenile department people, the law enforcement people, the early childhood people, the school people, could all come together at the same table and say, how are we going to use these monies to help support juvenile crime prevention in our county? Right now I'm working on the same process with Douglas County for their early childhood planning and to try to implement Healthy Start. And those are a different group of folks around the table, although some of them are the same people that are looking at developing those processes.
And Healthy Start is a program designed to give kids a healthy start by providing services and support to families. Could you describe that briefly so we can put that in context?
Sure. Actually, Marion and Polk County has Healthy Start, but there are a number of other counties. It's been in a pilot stage since 1993 when the legislature first allocated funding. Healthy Start is a program with the idea that every family needs support, that we can welcome new babies into our community, and so there are volunteers that actually go out and provide packets of information and answer questions. And this goes back, it used to be when communities were smaller and when life was a bit less hectic, I guess, that we had hospital people and public health nurses going out and visiting people all the time when they had their new baby and trying to make sure that people were supported in that. As budgets have become tighter, as urban areas have grown bigger, we've sort of fallen away from doing that. So Healthy Start is kind of an effort to go back to those roots that we've had in terms of community supporting new moms when they have their first baby.
And now you were working, and what got me into this was you mentioned Douglas County.
Right.
You've been working with them on the development of a program for that county. Did I understand you correctly?
Yes. And the other component of Healthy Start, just to complete it, is also that the research shows that when a mom has her first baby, when two parents have their first baby, but sometimes they're single moms having their first baby, that's the best teaching moment for people to get information about their baby, and that you can identify families that may be at higher risk to abuse their children. They may have a history of child abuse in their own background, have domestic violence issues or whatever. And by having people do ongoing visits with higher risk families, you can actually reduce the incidences of child abuse and neglect. And there have been wonderful outcomes from the program as it's been implemented in the pilot counties in the state. So Douglas County wants to participate with that. So what I'm doing is helping people come together and say, how are we going to do Healthy Start in Douglas County? What's it going to look like here? Who are the partners? Who's going to be involved?
And which counties are you working with besides Douglas County at this time?
Working with Marion County.
All right.
With Marion County, I'm doing more work around outcomes. I developed this super duper spreadsheet in Excel that the nonprofit providers that receive money from the county can use in their reporting. It automates their reporting function so they don't have to remember what they wrote last quarter. It just rolls up and they can insert their numbers and submit their reports.
Now let's pause for a moment and discuss outcomes, because for the community in general, that may be a piece of jargon that they may not understand. I mean, outcomes in the sense of how something finishes up. But you were a student with Hill Walker, and could you give us a little thumbnail sketch of the outcomes concept and how that's applied in what I'll call social services?
Right. For a long time in social services and in education, we were judging our results by how much money we put into them or how much seat time kids spent in class, classroom hours. For social services, how many counseling hours someone had. And no one was really trying to measure whether all this money we were investing and all this time we were spending ever resulted in people improving, getting better, meeting the goals that they had set for themselves. So what outcomes is an attempt to do is to try to say, what are the results of all of this effort that people are doing around children and family services? So it's a fairly simple concept, But making that transition when people are used to measuring dollars and time and saying, how do you actually measure whether people are improving or not, is kind of tricky.
Well, that's, now, in layman's terms, if I try to identify the outcomes concept, let me use a bicycle as an example. I could have a stationary bicycle or I can have a regular bicycle. If the outcome that I'm looking for is pure physiological exercise, perhaps either bicycle would be equally useful. We won't get into minutiae of that, but you're pumping the pedals and you're working up the energy and you're getting a cardiovascular workout. Well, you can get that possibly as well on a stationary bike as on a regular bike. But so if the outcome is exercise, there may be some nice esoteric arguments about it, but you could say that maybe they're equivalent. If the outcome is to get from Salem to Corvallis, then the stationary bike isn't doing you a bit of good. All you're doing is running in place or bicycling in place, but the mobile bike is what's going to get you there. And then you need to identify what is the outcome, what are you trying to achieve here, and then how does this program get you there, as opposed to, gee, look how nice that person's pedaling.
Right.
Is that's sort of my simplistic way of trying to understand this. Is that you're the one with the PhD in that area. Is that a reasonable way of trying to bring it into a layman's terms?
Sure, and I could give you some examples from Healthy Start that I just talked about earlier, some of the outcomes that they're measuring. If they were looking at dollars spent or just the amount of time that volunteers or social workers spend in the homes, that would be measuring outputs. Okay, that's the effort or the energy. But what they're looking at is what's the environment in the home? Do the little children have toys that are appropriate for their age to play with? What is the bonding that's going on between the mom and the child and the dad and the child in the home? Do the parents read to the child on a regular basis? When the child gets to be 3 years old, is the child linked with Head Start or some of these other programs? So it's looking at what are the impacts on the family, what are the dynamics, and also does the child get the immunizations that he or she needs? Is the child healthy, well?
It's all those things that go into the package with the child's needs, all the different needs that interrelate with that child.
Right, and you can take that concept and apply it to a shelter for youth, like with Northwest Human Services. We're looking at the educational circumstances of the child when they come in. Are they enrolled in school? Are they in an alternative program? Have they dropped out? Do they go sporadically? And then they work with the youth, and then their goal is that every youth will be going regularly to some educational program. Well, that's a wonderful outcome, because all of the research shows that the more kids are connected with education, the better their life's chances are going to be.
All right, well, now I'm going to pause for a moment. When we get back to you, I want to talk a little about Senate Bill 555, or triple nickel, as some of us do it. But first, I want to mention to our audience that you're with us on the Kevin Mannix Report, and if it's not already obvious, I'm Kevin Mannix, the host for the program. Our guest today is a lady who's involved in a variety of community-oriented activities and working as a consultant. I guess I would say largely relating now to how we can have more successful lives for our children and families in our communities, and her name is Janet Carlson. If you ever have any questions or concerns, would like to get in touch with me, feel free to call us in Salem at 503-364-1913, or you can use your internet connection and reach me by email at kevin@mannix.com. It's as simple as that, kevin@mannix.com, and I'll be able to respond to you via email. And if you want to use the old-fashioned, still useful snail mail, the address is 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301. We always enjoy hearing from you. And now I'll return to our guest of the hour, Janet Carlson. Now, we were talking, I just mentioned Senate Bill 555. Perhaps you could give us a little perspective on what that bill was about, the major juvenile package. I hate to call it crime prevention. It was also an intervention package, but can you give us a little sketch of that?
Well, if you recall, Kevin, you had a bill that was pre-session filed in November before the last session, House Bill 2268. And that was really the precursor of Senate Bill 555. The idea behind that bill was to look at juvenile crime prevention as a continuum, as a system, and try to say, how do we start at the earliest point in supporting children and families all the way through those adolescent years, and in the process help reduce juvenile crime. So it went through, what is the thing that if legislation is like making sausage, right? You don't want to you don't want to watch it. It went through all of those different.
It got ground up in the sausage.
It sure did. But I think what came out was a really excellent piece of work. And the idea is that we have the local commissions that I talked about. Were affirmed in that as being the entities to do the planning in the counties, to bring those folks to the table to look at doing comprehensive planning. I think the governor made an effort to try to work with the juvenile directors to have a package that would help adolescents who are on the verge of going into juvenile department programs or to the state training schools to try to prevent that from happening. But I think that the thing that got added in Senate Bill 555, much through your efforts and those of your colleagues, was to say we need to start early. We also need to look at programs like Healthy Start, like the Relief Nursery, the family building blocks that just got the new building out at Chelsea. I think you might have read that in the paper. The court-appointed special advocates program, because there's this huge connection between children who are in multiple foster care placements and those who get involved with crime later. And then with those school programs, before and after school programs, sometimes those are called family resource centers, getting the families more connected with the schools, lighted schools. All of those concepts are embedded within Senate Bill 555. And then the last part that I think is really a jewel in this bill is the idea about it's called community mobilization, which is another one of those jargon words. I don't know if I would have used that same language if I had pinned the concept, but the idea is what I talked about earlier, that an entire community needs to get behind this effort, that this isn't something that government comes in and does to communities, or even that government comes in and does with communities, but this is something that communities do with the support of government, with people saying, okay, we want part of our tax dollars to go to this effort, but we're in charge here. We're the ones that are making the decisions.
Well, in fact, part of the philosophical debate that we had to deal with was, is this state-centered or community-centered? We had to compromise a bit on that, but we're certainly trying to emphasize more the community-centered approach, bring children and families resources together at the community level and let them direct, as long as the state funds are being used for programs that have been tested as to outcomes that will make a difference.
Right, and I think, you know, on the outcomes piece, that's another part of the philosophical debate, because the Oregon benchmarks have been what our government in Oregon has been looking at as sort of our template for the broad outcomes. When you look at what our outcomes are for adolescents, they're reducing teen pregnancy, reducing high school dropout rates, reducing juvenile crime, reducing poverty. They're very problem-focused, very deficit-focused. And I went back to Washington, D.C., it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and was talking about benchmarks to a woman that works at this national think tank. It's called the Center on Youth Development and Policy Research. And I was touting benchmarks and showing her all these graphs and charts I had made at the State Commission about how we were going to get to these benchmarks. And she said, Janet, she said, you have children, right? I said, yes, I have 3. And she said, if your children graduated from high school, not being pregnant, had not committed a crime, were not using substance abuse, would you think that you were a success as a parent? And I said, oh no, I know what I want for my children. I want them to have warm relationships and someone that cares about them, that they can marry and have their own family. I want them to have wonderful educational experiences and get a job that really meets their needs and be involved in music and the arts. And as I went on and described to her what I wanted for my children, she said, well, then I think you need to rethink your benchmarks. So one of the things that I think that we're looking at as part of this philosophical debate is, do we see the glass half empty or do we see the glass half full? And are we going to be satisfied with sort of a C- level of, the child's not using substances, not involved in crime? Or are we saying that we really want to reach kind of an A level in terms of where our children and families are supported?
The benchmark should focus not so much on reducing problems as reflecting positive opportunities and good things that we've achieved.
Right. And there's 40 developmental assets have been developed by the Search Institute in Minnesota, and there's a lot of research behind them, and they focus on those positive things. And you'll see in Senate Bill 555, it talks about assets. That language was added all the way through. That's a reference to that body of research. And it's saying that youth need to have supportive families and adult role models in their lives and be involved in creative activities. And all of the things that I was talking to you about earlier, those are the types of things that we know build resiliency in youth. And so if we can focus on those positive things, it's really easy to wring your hands when you say, oh, gee, the divorce rate is so high and we have all these single parent families and, they're struggling and there's substance abuse and, children of incarcerated parents, and you just go on with the problems, people don't really know what to do with that. But when you say, can you mentor one child, or can you just know the names of the youth that live on your block in your neighborhood and say hello to them when you see them? What can churches do to engage youth? Those are the kinds of things that give people something really constructive and positive that they can wrap their arms around and say, yeah, we can do this.
The focus point. They need something they can focus on, something that they can do tonight, tomorrow, or whatever. And so you're focusing on the positive outcomes, but also helping people identify the methods that they can use in their immediate community to achieve those positive outcomes.
And that's really sort of the definition of community mobilization, is how do communities come together to reach those positive outcomes.
So now we see Janet Carlson, the advocate for community mobilization, but you're also now a candidate for state representative.
Yes, I am.
And that happens to be the seat that I'm presently occupying, but I'm term limited. So you're running in the Republican primary, unopposed as of right now?
As of right now, yes.
And the Democratic candidate who has filed is George Bell.
Yes, he is.
In terms of this campaign, do you have a particular message that, based on your background and knowledge, that you're going to be taking to the community over the next few months?
Yes, I have actually 3 issues that that are sort of the keystones of my campaign. The first one is quality education, and that includes the idea of parents being more involved with their children's schooling and looking at education broadly, that readiness to learn in those preschool and early childhood programs are very, very important as well. Juvenile crime prevention and public safety is a second area that I'm interested in, but it's sort of from the concept that we've talked about here today. And then the last one is efficient and effective use of taxpayer dollars. One of the areas that I'm working with in Marion County, there's a group of folks that have been meeting for over a year now that are the leaders of the different educational and social service agencies in our county, in Marion County. And it's called the Family Systems Investment Consortium, and I am the consultant to that group. And so what we're looking at is how do we develop a system that's more coordinated, that's more integrated, because problems don't come in silos. They don't come in, little lines. You have to weave fabric, like you were talking about before. So we want to pull people together and say, how can we connect these services? If mom needs something and the youngest child needs something and the teenager's involved in one system, how do we pull these together to look at the dynamics of that family and help support that family?
And so I'm just anticipating you would present yourself as Janet Carlson, well-educated, community connected, mom of 3 kids. Your husband's an attorney.
Yes, he is, but I don't hold that against him, or you either.
I won't say anything further.
We won't do attorney jokes here.
But you've worked for the state, you've worked with counties, you've worked as a teacher, so you're bringing all of these skills and talents together. How do you see the campaign today, looking forward? How do you see it working out in terms of beyond the primary? Do you see it as a big challenge, or I'm trying to ask for some prognostication here?
Well, I think the campaign is going very well. I've received a lot of positive support. I have a lot of volunteers already lined up. Because the primary is uncontested, or we're believing that it's uncontested, we are looking forward more to the general election. And I do see that as being an election that's going to be challenging. I am a first-time candidate. People don't know who I am, so I need to get my message out and be really clear about who I am and what I can offer the voters of District 32. So in that sense, yeah, I've got my work cut out for me, but I love a challenge, so I think it's going to be great.
Well, good for you, and I wish you the best. I'm sure we'll be seeing and hearing a lot more from you over the next many months and years to come, I'm sure. And thank you for joining us on the show.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Kevin. I enjoyed it.
And I'll thank our audience for joining us on the Kevin Mannix Report. Our guest today has been Janet Carlson. You've heard a lot about her and her ideas, and apparently you'll be hearing more from her on the campaign trail, at least in the Salem area, over the next few months. Thank you all for joining us.